If you're tackling the CompTIA Security plus SY0-701 exam, there's one concept that really flips traditional security on its head, and you absolutely have to master it. Zero trust. So our mission today is pretty simple. We're not just going to memorize a definition. We're going to do a deep dive into the core philosophy, the actual structure, and the components so you can really understand why it works.
And that's the whole game, right? Because zero trust is, I think, one of the most misunderstood ideas in security. Most people just sum it up with that mantra, trust nothing.
It's catchy. I get it. It sounds tough, but you're saying that's not the whole picture.
Not at all. It's an oversimplification. Trust nothing focuses on denial, on just blocking things. But zero trust is really a holistic approach. It's a whole strategy, and it's all centered around one word, verification.
Okay, verification.
Yes. It dictates that every single device, every process, every person, everything trying to access a resource has to be actively validated. The real mantra is everything must be continuously verified.
That reframing helps a lot. It forces you to kind of leave behind that traditional security mindset. The old way was all about the perimeter, right? Building that big wall.
Precisely. That traditional model was just massive firewalls separating the trusted internal network from the untrusted internet.
Yeah.
All our energy went into fortifying those outer walls.
And once a user or a device got past that wall, that's where the real trouble could start. Because inside that network zone, traffic was often given implicit trust.
Exactly right. If an attacker gets past the perimeter, maybe with a phishing email, they're suddenly inside a trusted zone, and then they can just move laterally, almost completely unchecked, because the network it implicitly trusts traffic moving from one internal zone to another.
That implicit trust is the real weak spot.
It's the critical flaw.
Yeah.
And zero trust just completely rejects that whole idea. It says location doesn't matter, being on-prem, in the cloud, wherever. It doesn't guarantee your security posture, so you have to be verified.
I like the analogy you hear sometimes. Traditional security is a castle with a huge wall.
Right.
But zero trust says that wall is fine, but it's not enough.
You're not even close.
Zero trust puts guards and checkpoints around every single room, every table, every item inside the castle.
You have to re-authenticate for every single step you take, even if you're already inside the main gate.
And that's so critical for the exam, because you have to remember that location is no longer the basis for trust. So here's a thought. Pause the audio for a moment. If your physical network is compromised and an attacker is on just one employee's laptop, how does that implicit trust allow them to move freely to, say, the main server room? Think about that fundamental difference in risk.
Okay, so let's dig into the core ideas that actually make this verification happen. The goal is to move from that passive "you're good" acceptance to constant active security checks.
So what are the mechanisms for that? It sounds like it's more than just one tool.
Oh, absolutely. You need multiple mechanisms working at the same time. At the user level, you're talking about mandatory multi-factor authentication, strong encryption everywhere, and really, really granular system permissions. We're stacking layers.
Which brings us right to a fundamental principle, one that really underpins all of zero trust: least privilege.
Absolutely essential. I mean, zero trust just doesn't work without it. Permissions have to be set to the absolute bare minimum that a user or a device needs to do its job right now. That's it.
So if someone only needs to read a file, they shouldn't have the permission to delete it.
Exactly. And if that account gets compromised, the damage is strictly contained to that bare minimum capability. That's the win.
Right.
But how does the system know when to grant that access? And how does it change if the situation changes? That's where policy-driven access control comes in. Decisions are never static.
Wait, so if a device is using MFA, isn't that good enough? Why do we need a separate policy engine to reevaluate every single request?
Because the security posture is always changing. I mean, think about it. You log in with MFA from your trusted corporate laptop in the office. You get a certain set of privileges, but then you take that same laptop to a public coffee shop Wi-Fi network. Or maybe your OS shows an unpatched vulnerability. Your identity is the same, but your risk profile is suddenly way higher.
Ah, I see. So the policy engine sees that change.
Exactly. It evaluates your requests based on who you are, but also where you are, the time of day, the health of your device, all of it. It then decides to grant, deny, or, and this is key, revoke your access right in the middle of a session if your posture changes.
Okay, so we're talking about specific components here. There's the policy decision point, the PDC, which makes that final authentication decision.
Yes, and the policy engine is the intelligence that feeds that PDC. It's what evaluates all those inputs against the rules.
Got it. Okay, let's unpack this a little. If the policy engine says, yes, grant access, how does that decision actually get enforced across the network? I mean, on all the different routers and switches. How does that happen?
That coordination is exactly why a zero-trust environment has to be separated into what we call functional planes. This is key technical knowledge for the exam, and it applies to everything: physical hardware, VMs, cloud, all of it.
Okay.
So first you have the control plane. Think of this as the brain, the command center.
It's not actually touching the user traffic?
Right. It just defines and manages the actions of the second plane. It holds the routing tables, session tables, NAT tables. It decides how traffic should flow.
And that policy administrator component we mentioned that lives here in the control plane.
It does. It's the enforcer. It communicates the policy engine's decision down to something called the policy enforcement point, or PP.
And the PPP is the gateway itself, right? Like the actual firewall or router?
Yes, exactly. The policy administrator generates the access token and tells the PPP to physically allow or deny that connection. It's centralized control over decentralized enforcement. It's a really elegant design.
Okay, so that's the brain. What's the other plane?
The other one is the data plane. This is the muscle, the action layer. It's what processes the actual traffic, the frames, the packets. It does the forwarding, the encrypting, the actual NAT work.
So the control plane decides, the data plane executes.
You got it.
And this whole framework is so important because, like you said, networks are everywhere now. This handles the fluidity of cloud remote work, where someone might be moving between a coffee shop and home all in one day.
And that's why organizations are adopting it so fast. The number one advantage is threat scope reduction. By forcing verification on every connection, you just drastically shrink the number of attack paths. You limit that lateral movement.
And this brings us right back to monitoring and analytics. In this assume breach world, you have to be watching constantly.
It's non-negotiable. This is where tools like endpoint detection and response EDR fit so perfectly into the zero-trust mindset. You need to watch activity in real time to feed good data back into that policy engine.
Okay, let's make this practical. Pause the audio for a second. Picture a remote employee connecting from that coffee shop. Visualize the chain of zero-trust components that work together to make sure their device can simply access a sensitive file.
You got the policy engine checking the device health. Is it patched? The policy decision point requires MFA. It grants only the bare minimum permission. And then the policy administrator tells the PEP to connect them through the data plane. It's a whole chain of verification.
All right, let's shift to the exam mental model. When you see a zero-trust question, you have to recognize it's about a strategic shift. If an answer choice is about a holistic strategy, that's your first big clue.
Yeah, and look for language that focuses on three key things. First, continuous verification. Anything that talks about validating, regardless of whether a device is inside or outside the network.
Second, dynamic policy. Look for decisions that adapt based on changing factors, not just a static IP address.
And third, multiple layers. The right answer will almost always involve deploying multiple controls at once. MFA, encryption, EDR, access controls. That layering is a huge giveaway for zero trust.
Okay, now let's talk about the biggest mistake people make on the exam with this. They confuse zero trust with just basic network segmentation.
This is such a critical point to get right. Network segmentation, using VLANs, is a great security practice. It limits the scope of an attack.
But segmentation by itself is just dividing up the network. It doesn't do any of the verification we've been talking about.
Exactly. You can have a segmented network, but once a device is inside a VLAN, it might still have that implicit trust with everything else in that same segment.
So a compromised user still has room to move around.
They do. Zero trust goes so much further. It's about verifying identity and posture before granting that micro-access no matter what VLAN you're in. Zero trust is a mindset, a strategy. It's not just a VLAN configuration.
So, to wrap this up, zero trust is the evolution of security. It's a strategy that applies continuous verification to every interaction. It defines its policies in the control plane and then executes them down in the data plane.
And it's all supported by those robust controls. Mandatory MFA, total encryption, and that all-important principle of least privilege.
So remember, if legacy security was all about keeping the bad guys out, zero trust assumes the bad guys are already inside. and we have to watch and verify every single thing they do.
And that brings up a final thought for you to take away. If Zero Trust requires this constant internal monitoring, this assume breach paradigm, what other security tech in your study notes naturally supports this? Think about things like endpoint detection and response or other endpoint security tools. Think about how they act as essential sensors inside that bigger Zero Trust framework.